Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're reverse engineering a global crisis. We're going to trace the domino effect right from a desperate food riot all the way back to the invisible, overarching forces of climate and macroeconomics. Because, we're looking at a deeply interconnected system here. A disruption on one side of the planet, it can literally empty a dinner plate on the other. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The breaking point. We have to begin at the very end of the line, the explosive symptom of a completely failing system.
History tells us that when staple foods just become totally unattainable, citizens driven by pure economic desperation will attack shops or government buildings just to secure basic survival items, like bread or grain. It's the exact same phenomenon that sparked the French and Russian revolutions. But a food riot isn't just about public anger. It's actually the absolute final alarm bell. It means a food security structure has just completely collapsed under the pressure. So we got to ask ourselves, what actually pushes an entire community to cross that desperate threshold into outright social unrest? What turns a tight budget into a full-blown emergency? Well, the answer lies in the razor-thin margins of global poverty. Oxium provides this incredibly chilling metric for the breaking point. They calculated that a mere 1% increase in the price of food can push 16 million more people below the poverty line. Think about that for a second. 16 million. Just a single percentage point fluctuation can absolutely devastate the survival calculus for that many human beings, basically turning a difficult month into a life-threatening crisis. Which brings us to Section 2, the price of survival. Since price is that immediate trigger, we really need to look at what's happening to the cost of survival on a global scale right now. As of May 2026, the World Bank reports that cereal prices are steadily climbing. If you look at the trajectory, average prices for wheat are sitting 19% higher year on year, and maize is right up there as well. Now remember, these aren't luxury goods we're talking about. These are the foundational calories that quite literally sustain human life across the globe. But how do these global prices translate into local pain? Looking at the inflation data worldwide, we can clearly see that even when grain exists on the open market, domestic food price inflation is making it wildly unaffordable for huge chunks of the developing world. In real terms, food price inflation is actually outpacing overall inflation in 14% of the countries tracked. So the reality is, even if the world manages to grow enough food, the local currency in a given household simply cannot buy it anymore.
Section 3. Climate and conflict collide. Because, as you might guess, this unaffordability isn't happening in a vacuum. It's being driven by massive, compounding global shocks.
If we trace the historical timeline, it's obvious that extreme price volatility consistently leads to societal unrest. We saw it with the global food riots back in 2007 and 2008. Then the crises recurred in 2010 and 2011. Fast forward to July 2021, and we saw massive unrest in South Africa, which escalated during a record economic downturn into severe food riots. And now? Well, we are facing a terrifying new convergence of threats in 2026.
We are essentially dealing with a dual threat multiplier. On one hand, conflict in the Middle East is disrupting vital trade routes like the Strait of Hormuz. That's driving forecasted fertilizer prices up an incredible 31%, making it the least affordable it's been since 2022. But then that collides directly with a 61 to 87% probability of a devastating El Niño emerging by mid-2026, which brings severe weather anomalies right to major crop-producing regions. It is quite literally a perfect storm of geopolitical and environmental pressure. Moving to Section 4, the global hunger map. These global macroeconomic and climate forces aren't just theoretical numbers sitting on a spreadsheet. They are landing devastating blows on specific, highly vulnerable regions as we speak.
Take Sudan, for example. 14 localities are risking famine, a situation totally compounded by the early depletion of food stocks. Or West and Central Africa, where a staggering 52.9 million people are facing acute food insecurity. Over in East Asia, the Philippines is warning that an El Niño-induced drought could slash their rice output by 20 to 50%. And meanwhile, in Latin America and the Caribbean, Haiti has 6 million people facing crisis-level insecurity, driven by this toxic mix of inflation, climate shocks, and import dependency. The localized impacts of these global disruptions are stark, they're immediate, and they're compounding. It's a really harsh reminder of just how fragile the daily supply chains we rely on actually are. Section 5. Slow onset disasters. While we naturally tend to focus on sudden, explosive crises like a blocked trade route or a sudden outbreak of conflict, academic researchers warn we are totally ignoring the boiling frog scenario. This brings us to a really critical concept. A slow onset disaster creeps up on a population over months, sometimes years. Unlike an earthquake or a massive hurricane, things like creeping desertification, prolonged drought, rising temperatures, and sea level rise, they quietly destroy agricultural output and livelihoods way before the mainstream media even notices. They essentially slowly choke off a region's ability to feed itself. So here is the crucial point, the fatal flaw in our global disaster response. Sudden emergencies, they get all the media attention and the massive influxes of funding. But meanwhile, slow onset disasters, which cause deeply entrenched, long-lasting food insecurity, are critically underfunded and totally underreported. We are basically systematically starving the very programs that are meant to stop a crisis before it even starts. And this funding issue builds into an even bigger blind spot. Because even when researchers and policymakers actually dedicate time to studying these creeping threats, a massive 94.1% of the focus is solely on drought. That leaves less than 6% of attention for other major climate catastrophes like desertification, soil salinization, or ocean acidification. We're trying to solve a multidimensional puzzle here, but we're basically only looking at one single piece. Section 6, Adapting to the Future. So the big question is, how do we adapt to this complex, creeping threat before it results in the empty shelves that spark a riot? How do we build genuine resilience? To understand effective adaptation, researchers use something called the Hadley Food Security Framework. It brilliantly illustrates the complete picture by breaking down human survival into interconnected components. As you'll see, it's not just a straight, simple line from farm to table. It's this dynamic, spinning wheel of continuous requirements. The framework clearly shows that true food security is not just about growing more food. It actually rests on three vital pillars. First, you have availability. That's the actual production and stability of the supply. Second is access, meaning both the physical logistics and the economic ability to actually buy it. And then, crucially, the third pillar, utilization. This one is so often the missing piece. Utilization means having the right diets, food safety, and the sociocultural factors that dictate how a community actually prepares and consumes its calories. The academic literature reveals a really powerful insight here. To survive these fluctuating climates and compounding global shocks, our future strategies have to look beyond simply throwing money at access. We need to actively embrace underutilized, highly resilient crop species that can actually handle these slow onset disasters. And honestly, just as importantly, we need to integrate age-old culture-specific preservation techniques, things like drying, smoking, and fermenting. These traditional methods are absolutely vital for maintaining year-round food availability, especially in areas where modern preservation is either totally scarce or way too expensive. Which leaves us with a really critical question to consider as these geopolitical and environmental pressures keep mounting. If compounding global shocks, from conflict-driven inflation right down to slow-onset climate disasters, are the new normal, is our current global food system designed to truly sustain humanity? Or is it just holding on until the next breaking point? It's a question we literally can no longer afford to ignore. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this gives you a brand new lens to view the headlines through. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.